Hey there, everyone. Just click continue to carry on with the session being recorded for those of you who are attending live. Welcome to our first Q&A in our How to Interpret Your Transits class. So we're going to just take questions from students today. It's very informal in the sense that I'm not teaching or delivering any new information, but it's a chance to address any questions or stuck points or confusion moments that you might be having with the theory that we've covered so far. I know many of you are going to be applying this material to your own charts. Of course, that's what we all do when we're learning timing, and we love to keep an eye on what's going on for us in our charts. Let's try and have our questions today framed in such a way that they could be helpful to other students. I know it can feel like we're going a little bit off track when it's just doing a lot of personal chart interpretation. So let's think about how you're working with the technique. If you're understanding the different pieces of theory, that will probably lead to a really helpful session for everybody. So I know in class we've covered things like how to find a transit in the ephemeris. We've looked at definitions about A-list or VIP type transits. We've also been going into interpretations with transits around how do we do that and what things should we cover. So any questions along those lines are going to be perfect and totally appropriate for today. I do understand that you might be thinking, here's a piece of theory and this is how it applies to my chart. But just to understand that it's not possible for me to give detailed, personal, individual chart interpretations here because this is more of a learning space. So our goal today is to make sure that you're understanding the theory and that you feel like you can try applying it. But I know we've had 2 classes. Some of you will have already completed 1 or possibly 2 homework assignments. And I know that students always have lots of questions at this point in the training. So a big warm welcome to all of you who are able to join us for the live Q&A. So the way that we work this is that if you have a question, just pop a note in the chat box. You can either just say, I have a question, or you can actually type your question out in the chat box if that's convenient for you. And we'll basically just kind of go around the proverbial room, and I'll call on whoever's question is next in the queue and if you're able to unmute, I'll get you to unmute and ask your question, and then I'll do my best to guide you through it. So if you do have a question or an issue that you want to discuss, just let me know in the chat. You could just say, I have a question, or if you want to write out the question. I know some of you will be in situations where it's not possible to unmute, and you're welcome to type out the question as we go. Okay, so we are off and running. I think Oscar is up first. So Oscar, let's get you unmuted. Hi.
Hi, Kelly. How are you?
Very well, thanks. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for the sessions and the lessons. They're very, very clear and inspiring.
Fantastic. My pleasure.
Listen, I have a question regarding the transits because, well, this is a personal experience right now. It just happened a couple of weeks ago. So I have Pluto right now on top of my moon, conjunct.
Yep.
A couple of days ago, I had Mars opposite this. Well, Mars opposite Pluto that just happened.
So Mars conjunct your moon?
No. Pluto conjunct the moon,
Right.
and then Mars opposite this Pluto conjunct the moon.
Right. So
Right?
the transit is transiting Mars opposite the natal moon,
Which is conjunct Pluto.
which transiting Pluto is conjunct the moon. Yeah.
Right. Correct.
Okay.
So I had, of course, this huge discussion with a female family member, and it was like a super complicated thing and so on. Okay. But a couple of days later, I have this friend who has the moon just 1 degree later than mine, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he also has Pluto conjunct his moon, and Mars was transiting in opposite, doing exactly the same transit. So I just waited a couple of days, and then I asked him, "Did you have this sort of experience happening in your life?" And he said, "No, absolutely not." So this is where I'm thinking, is the level of consciousness on a person or the level of awareness of control or something have to do or help you deal with your transits, even though he didn't know about this transit? And I think I didn't know before that. So what is actually I'm trying to understand, it's like, why?
Sure. Yeah. You're like, how can I have this big experience and then my friend doesn't have anything kind of thing?
Yeah.
Okay. So one quick question and then a comment. When you say your friend has their moon right next to yours, is
Yes.
your moon at 26 degrees Capricorn and
No,
your
his
friend's
is
at
mine is at
27?
20 mine is at 25th and 25, and his is at 26.
Right. Okay. So they are quite close and they are definitely both being activated. When you asked your friend, did you say, like, did you have a difficult conversation with a family member? Was that kind of how you phrased it to
Female
them?
family, I asked him female family member, which can be his girlfriend because his moon is the ruler of his seventh house, and or like his mother or any other type of family member. So that's what I asked him.
Yeah. Okay. So here's where I want to acknowledge how well you're doing in terms of understanding the theory, and also to let you know there's often more to it than what we might expect. So the transit Pluto conjunct natal moon that was activated as a trigger transit by transiting Mars. That's a great piece of theory or technique that you've done there. So excellent work on picking that out, because that's exactly what we'd say. If Pluto is conjunct or square or aspecting a natal planet and then transiting Mars comes into the mix, we're definitely going to get that sense of things heating up or blowing up or coming out, if you like, 100%. But the moon can relate to sometimes about half a dozen topics in our chart. So it might be a female family member. It could be, you mentioned your friend has a romantic partner who's a woman. So it would make sense that there could be something there. But it might be that in the context of your friend's chart, if they have a Cancer seventh house, if I've understood that correctly, um, the moon actually describes the partner. And so in some instances, a transit like this will be in your chart, but it's telling us that something that's going on with your partner. And it might not be that he had the difficult conversation with a female family member, but it could be the partner had a difficult situation with someone in their life. So it could have been the partner's mother or the partner's boss or some woman in the partner's life, if you like. Or it could be that their partner was having a health issue or an emotional issue of some kind. So there's a few different ways. So I guess what I would say to you is you're absolutely heading down the right road. And when we get to that place of like, this is the transit activation, there's usually 3 or 4 branches as to how it could manifest. And it won't always show up on every branch or every topic for everyone. And so what I would say to you, Oscar, is I would go back to your friend and say, okay, I've got some extra info from class. Was there anything, that your partner was dealing with that was stressful or aggravating for them over this time frame, if you like?
Yeah.
Does
Okay.
that
But
help clarify that?
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But so the thing is that I have to go beyond on my thinking, not only, so these are the three options that I thought, because that I lived them. So I have to
Yes.
think that maybe, okay, so it can happen that in your chart the transits represent situations happening to you or to people related to you, right?
Yeah, and every transit in your chart won't necessarily describe something for another person, but when you have a transit in your chart that involves the ruler of the 7th house, for instance, it often, I would say almost 50-50. It's like, well, nothing's going on for me, but my partner's got this thing going on. And so the energy comes in that way. When you have a transit that involves the ruler of the IC or the ruler of the 4th house, this can sometimes describe a situation happening with a parent, for instance. So yeah, I think this is it's really just a case of you're still learning, and it's very normal to feel like, well, this happened to me, so it should happen to somebody else. And it's just an opportunity to broaden your understanding of how one specific transit might show up. But I think you've done some great technical work, and there's just a couple more add-ons with the interpretation there.
All right. Thank you so much, Kelly.
My pleasure, Oscar. Thank you. That was a great question. Excellent. Okay, I think Leah Lawrence is up next. So let's see if we can get you to unmute, Leah. There you go. Can you hear us?
Hello, Kelly. I can.
Excellent. Welcome.
Thank you. I do have a question about transiting planets. Can they also be affected? What I mean is, say something in a chart that I've noticed has got 13 degrees of Uranus in the fourth angular.
Yep.
And then 13 degrees Saturn is applying and making an opposition to natal Uranus
Yep.
at 13 degrees. And Uranus is currently 13 degrees of Taurus. So my question is, what's the theory behind Uranus to Uranus, I guess?
Yes, that's a great question. We will touch on planet cycles like this. So transiting Saturn to natal Saturn or transiting Uranus to natal Uranus. We're going to touch on that in class 4. So if you're okay to hold that question until our next Q&A, that'll give me a chance to respond to that once we've gone into that in some detail.
Yep. All right. No worries.
Yeah. Does that help?
Yep.
Cool. I mean, it doesn't answer your question right now, but it's a slightly, we treat it slightly differently. And
yes.
So rather than giving the whole teaching now, knowing that we'll do it in a couple of weeks. The one piece that I would say, because you also mentioned, so I'm guessing natal Uranus is at 13 Leo, and there's a wonderfully, expressive generation of people that have Uranus in Leo, as you can imagine what your community would be like if you have Uranus in Leo. And transiting Saturn in Aquarius is opposing that. It's not so transit Saturn to natal Uranus isn't a type of transit that I do a lot of work with because because it's in a situation between Saturn and Uranus. Uranus is usually the dominant influence, if you like, to go back to our aspect theory. So it's something to be aware of, but you're on the right track. The transit I'd probably go for is Uranus square Uranus. I think there's some reading on this. A great book that has info on transits like this is called The Gods of Change by Howard Suspordis. So if you've got that book and you're looking for info on Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto transits, all of them, but including like Neptune square Neptune or Uranus square Uranus or Uranus opposite Uranus, that book does have some great info. We'll cover that in class 4. So stay tuned for more on that one.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks so much, Leah. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Okay. I think Neha is up next. I hope I've pronounced that okay.
Yeah. Hi, Kelly.
Hi, how are you?
Good. It's lovely to see you and talk to you. I've been doing your classes and loving it.
Great. Yes, I've seen your name pop up in various places, so it's lovely to put a face to your name.
Yeah, thank you. So my question is, we have the faster moving planets like, say, Mars.
Yes.
So if we have a transit Mars, we learned in class that it stays in one sign for 6 weeks.
Yes.
So for example, right now we have Mars in Leo.
Yes.
Which is in my 7th house. And I have Jupiter at 8 degrees.
Right.
So my question is that would I feel it because it's such a small period, like it's just 6 weeks versus a Saturn, which is say 2.5 years in an entire sign.
Yes.
Would you feel it the entire 6 weeks or would it be more when it's say conjunct Jupiter? And when it's conjunct Jupiter, how does it affect? So that's
great questions. So you will feel the influence of transiting Mars through your 7th house the whole time it's there. So that 6-week vibe of Mars in the 7th house, you'll definitely notice that. And transit Mars in the 7th can be about being a little more assertive or outspoken with other people. Sometimes that does lead to an increase in that tension or that sense of discord, because rather than biting your tongue or going along to keep the peace, you're actually saying something or taking action about something. So the two kind of go hand in hand. So we do tend to feel the effects of the qualities of Mars around the topics of the house that it's transiting through for sure. But the specific transit Mars conjunct natal Jupiter, you'll really feel that for just a few days, right around the
just 2
time.
days.
Yeah, it will just be 2 or 3 days tops where transit Mars is exactly conjunct natal Jupiter. And so that would be the time frame that we would have a look at that for that particular transit. To answer, what that might mean, transiting Mars to natal Jupiter, are you a daytime chart or a nighttime chart?
Nighttime.
Nighttime.
Night.
Yeah. So so you have a slightly more productive, or a chart that is a little bit more responsive in a positive way to Mars. So Mars on Jupiter in the 7th, a positive interpretation of that would be a wonderful new thing that happens as a result of a person or a partnership, like an opportunity coming to you through a very close friend or a business partner or even a romantic partner. To draw on some of what we were talking about when we were talking about Oscar's question earlier, this is happening in your 7th house. So if you have a business partner or a romantic partner, this could talk about a good thing for that person rather than for you.
Right.
So if you're in a relationship with someone and they get a promotion at work, or they get a bonus at work, or their parents give them a fancy bottle of champagne or something, you'll usually share in that goodness, even though it doesn't come directly to you. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So again, now, so I have Saturn, my rising sign is Aquarius. So we have Saturn in Aquarius. So like now this is going to be, like Mars was 6 weeks. This is 2.5 years.
Yes.
So then will I feel it more when it is at my ascendant is 10 degrees Aquarius? So then will it be just that period or the entire 2.5 years? Because it's a longer transit.
It's a longer transit, but the same theory applies. So this will apply to all students who have an Aquarius ascendant, an Aquarius first house. You will definitely feel the slightly heavier or weighty, or that sense of limits, if you like, or effort. You will feel that the whole 2.5 years that Saturn. I wish that we wouldn't feel it, but we do.
I was hoping it's just the degrees, because I calculated the 3 hits and I was like, okay, that's it.
That's it. I mean, I will say, to qualify in the same way, that when transiting, so you do feel like a low grade version of Saturn in the first house the whole 2.5 years, but it is a peak, or it's more intense when Saturn is conjunct the ascendant by degree. So if your ascendant is in the early part of Aquarius, like 8, 9, 10, 11, or 12, 10, I think anyone with an ascendant in that early part, it will be more intense and most Saturn for this calendar year, 2021. It won't be as heavy next year because Saturn will be in the first house, but not pressing down on the ascendant. And so, I'm not sure if I can think of an appropriate analogy. I mean, the thing with Saturn in Aquarius, some weather analogy came to my mind around, it's freezing cold outside. And when Saturn's on your ascendant, you're actually outside in that intense weather. When Saturn's in your first house, but not on your ascendant, maybe you're inside and it's a little bit more comfortable, but you still have a restriction because going outside is not pleasant. So it's more intense when Saturn is on the ascendant by degree. And it is so important to take care of both your physical and your mental health through that time. That is really what a Saturn ascendant or Saturn first house transit is trying to teach you, is the importance or the value of prioritizing care for self, basically. And then what kind of boundaries or routines or responsibilities do you need to take on or set to help you with that? So hopefully that helps clarify. Always more intense by degree, but you will feel them the whole time they're in a house.
Okay, great. So again, if it's Pluto and he's in a house for so many years, so do you feel it like that many years?
Yes, you do.
Okay.
Now
Okay.
but there's a quality, you think about being warm and think about the different gradations of being warm. You can be warm in a way that's a little bit uncomfortable, and then you can be warm in a way that's extremely uncomfortable. And with the longer transits, Uranus will spend 7 years in a sign or a house, and Neptune 14 and
Yeah.
Pluto up to 20 or so. They become sort of longer chapters in our life. And sometimes we're not even aware of how that planet is affecting us until it leaves that sign or that house, because it's been around for so long. We've come to sort of think or believe that this is the normal way of doing things. And one of the reasons I know that is having had the privilege of being able to talk to clients for 20 years, we have seen Neptune leave a house after 14 years. And so they have reflected on how things are different, even though it was hard to get a grasp of perhaps what Neptune was doing for such a long time. But it is the theory holds, whether it's a Mars transit or Saturn transit or an outer planet transit, that you do feel it the whole time it's in a house, but it is much, much, much stronger when it's directly activating your chart by degree.
Okay, great. Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank
I
you
know
so
that they're
much.
good things to clarify, because I'm sure lots of students are trying to get their head around that at this
Yeah.
point.
I have one more question. If it's okay, else I won't. Somebody asked me that, would you be able to tell me if I'll move into a new house? So when somebody says that, I know you look at the fourth house, you look at the IC. So do you see a transit with that or
Yeah,
something
and
else?
we will cover topics and transits, so moving or money or relationships. We're going to cover that in class 3.
Okay,
So
great.
I'll say, let's come back to your question after we have that class, because you might find the info we cover there will help give you what you need. Because yes, you can certainly look at certain transits and say, oh, this looks like a move, or this looks like a new job, or this looks like trouble at work, for instance. So yes, we can do it, and stay tuned for class 3 on that one.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kelly.
No worries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Tremaine, I think you are up next. Hi.
Hello, lovely. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Very good. So good to see you.
It's great to have you here live in real time.
I know, absolutely. Yeah, look, this has been great so far. It's actually already answered a few questions that I had. One of the main things I was interested to know was if you had, say, a transiting benefic planet, let's just say Jupiter,
Yep.
and it forms a conjunction with, say, a planet in fall,
Yep.
like maybe Mercury in Pisces or something like that. Would that potentially, because of the benefic elements of Jupiter, would that create an opportunity for that natal Mercury to grow and evolve based on the fact that it is in fall and it has always been a struggle for that person?
Yeah, it can do two things. Because it's Jupiter, and keep in mind, this is one reason why I do like to talk about Jupiter a lot, transit perspective, is that Jupiter is the biggest planet in the solar system. So there is a weight, like a heftiness to Jupiter that, vastly outshines any of the other planets. And so Jupiter has this way of emphasizing things. And Jupiter's kind of neutral. He will emphasize and amplify. And so the good gets better and the tough can get trickier or bigger. Usually with Jupiter, if it's amplifying a difficulty, it's doing that with the intention of helping you understand the issue or the concern or the problem so that you can work to a solve or a solution for it. And so, yeah, to your question, I thought of like a couple of examples, like transiting Jupiter in Pisces to, say, Mercury in Pisces, or transiting Jupiter in Aries to Venus in Aries, or even transiting Jupiter in Taurus to Mars in Taurus, for instance. All of those are a planet like in detriment or in fall there. Jupiter, in my experience, will do two things. It will make the issue, the frustration, or the concern bigger so that you have to address it. But because it's Jupiter, it is inclined to support or help you. And so even as the issue gets bigger and your attention and your energy and your resources are drawn to the problem, that can actually prompt a solve or a fix or a solution. So that if, for instance, say it's Mercury in Pisces, and maybe you know that you have a lot of trouble focusing or keeping a clear mind, or you get overwhelmed easily, that could get worse while Jupiter is on your Mercury. But in the getting worse of it, you might think, dang it, finally, I'm just going to try meditation, or I'm going to try this walking every day, or I'm going to try this journal writing that somebody's told me to do. And that act of being so frustrated that you try something new or different, which is what Jupiter is happy for you to do, actually provides a solution or a support that helps you manage the issue. So I think it works on two levels for Jupiter there, with a detriment planet or a fall planet.
I get you. Okay. So it's about having that awareness in the first place and potentially harnessing that if you have.
Yeah.
Okay.
Whereas like a Saturn transit to a planet that's in detriment or fall just tends to create a big problem of the nature of that planet, but without necessarily the support or the solution.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And then I just wanted to clarify. So obviously there's a big focus on conjunctions and oppositions, because obviously that's a difficult energy to try and have to manage. And would we still place some emphasis on the trines and sextiles, but potentially it's not as emphasized because there's more ease and flow, I guess, that comes with that energy?
So do you mean for Jupiter transits specifically, or just all transits in general?
Yeah, all of them in general. Probably more so for the Uranus and Pluto ones.
Yeah. So with and this is a really good question, because I know there's been some chat in the discussion forum about just clarifying this. So this is great to go through. So if the transiting thing is Jupiter or the nodes, I do tend to focus on conjunctions from those planets as transiting bodies as a starting point. But that said, Jupiter wants to help. Jupiter is just literally, in its best case scenario, somebody who has something that can help and wants to give it to you. And any contact that Jupiter makes by transit, so if Jupiter is square or opposite or sextile or trine, Jupiter is going to be trying to give you something. He gives you something that is moderate and balanced or manageable, or you're ready to receive when Jupiter makes a trine or a sextile. When Jupiter makes by transit a square or an opposition, he's giving you something, but sometimes he's giving you too much at once, or he's giving you something that you aren't quite set up to receive. And so there's a level of having to adjust to bring that in. Right. Remembering back to our aspect theories, remembering that the trine aspect is the special Jupiter aspect. Transits from Jupiter by trine are especially golden and helpful. So definitely pay attention to that in your own charts. But for, Saturn, so you were asking specifically about the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Definitely use the sextiles and trines as well, because those planets move really slowly. And even like I know I've definitely had Uranus sextiles or Pluto sextiles over my life, and you do feel them. You will, there's the quality of Pluto or Uranus or Neptune. It comes in a more manageable, less overwhelming way when it comes in via sextile or trine, so that you have a chance. It's like a gentle wave coming in instead of some big, thing that's going to, dump you on the sand or what have you. So I would use for those planets, I would be using all 5 aspects. So the conjunction, square, and opposition, plus the sextile and trine. And in traditional astrology, we think about the aspects as squares and oppositions with effort or with difficulty, and sextiles and trines are things that come in via transit with ease or with responsive receptiveness, or there's like a willingness to work with that. Does that help? I'm not sure if I've gone too much outside the scope of your question.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. And just thank you for the ground and grow. It was actually going to be one of my questions about when Jupiter and Saturn sort of start to transit through a house.
Yep.
They're a focus and emphasis. And then I listened to the last 5 minutes of class 2, and you talked about grounding and growing. Because I have a Pisces ascendant, and as soon as Jupiter hit Pisces, I was promoted at work and promoted somewhere else. And just, yeah, so it was quite fascinating. It got me thinking about, well, hang on, it hasn't actually hit my ascendant yet, and it hasn't hit another planet I have there. But as it's moving through the house, I'm noticing things. So yeah, I'm seeing it play out in real life. So thank you.
Fantastic. Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Yeah. And it is, especially because, Jupiter and Saturn spend a chunk of time without it being excessively long in each of the houses. Most of our human brains can manage a 1 to a 2 year timeline. And we can think about, okay, Jupiter's going to be here for 12 months. How am I going to try and, tune into that or work with it? Or Saturn's going to be over here for a couple of years. What am I going to have to get done or take on or organize? And it's something that I sort of started working with as a concept very early in my teaching career. And it's been so helpful in such a practical way. So yeah, I'm glad that Ground and Grow was helpful for you. And I'm even more glad that it's showing up in such wonderful ways already, because we still have,
Yes.
maximum Jupiter and Pisces to come as we're recording this.
I know. That was it from me. Thank you so, so much. Great to see you.
My pleasure. Great to see you. Thanks for being here. Okay. I think we have Jay up next. Let's see if we can get you unmuted. Hi, Jay.
Hi, Kelly. How are you?
Very well, thanks. How are you doing?
Good. Great.
Are you safe and well?
Yeah.
Good.
I'm good.
Good.
Actually, all these transits classes actually reminded me of 2002 transits, where Pluto was in Sagittarius. It was squaring my moon in Pisces, also
Right.
Jupiter. That was a very tough time.
Yes.
And 2003 also, whereas the Saturn return was also there. So that was also a very tough time for me psychologically and emotionally.
Pluto square the moon would be very tough. Yes, I've had that one. It doesn't feel good, but you learn a lot.
And now actually I am in the Pluto cycle of empowered belonging. It's actually happening on my 4th house. So it is affecting my parents actually, father and all. Then the Neptune is actually moving through the Virgo. Neptune is also moving through my Pisces. 6th house and the 12th house become prominent. And Uranus is actually giving me freedom from want and freedom from dependence.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. So, yeah.
It's a lot. The outer planets are having a big impact in your chart right now.
Yes. So I'm happy to have your classes. And I was especially reminded after this eclipse, this solar eclipse, because it happened 18 years back, or in that 2002 year. A lot of revelations, a lot of prophetic things actually really started happening. And I started remembering all those things 18 years back.
That's really powerful. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're really noticing the eclipses of that 18-year nodal cycle showing up.
Yes, Kelly. Yes.
Yeah. Excellent.
So that's what I wanted to convey, and that's all. I don't have any other questions. But only one thing. Yeah, one thing is that now actually I see that Uranus would be exactly conjuncting my natal Jupiter, 13 degrees.
Yeah.
Maybe in the July 1st or something. Okay. So what would be the impact of that? I just wanted to know a little bit about that.
Uranus conjunct natal Jupiter. I love Uranus-Jupiter transits. They're exciting and big fireworks, but it's not, fireworks are different from like an explosion. An explosion goes off and it's like, ooh, but fireworks, we're usually like, ah. So there's a difference in quality there. So Uranus, Jupiter, and Richard Tarnas writes beautifully about Uranus, Jupiter cycles in his book, Cosmos and Psyche. And he talks about this as a cycle of discovery and invention and kind of fast-paced advancements in a variety of industries that we see in society. Well, he's looking at like transiting Jupiter with transiting Uranus, but I think some of those threads are applicable when we have transiting Uranus in aspect to natal Jupiter. So it can be opening up about wisdom, philosophy, teaching, international connections, all those classic Jupiter pieces. But I would also look at the topics of Jupiter's houses in your chart, Now, I think you have a Libra rising chart.
Yes, Kelly, you
Yeah,
remember it
yeah.
perfect. Actually. Yeah.
Yeah, so Pisces is 6th house and Sagittarius is 3rd house for you.
Correct.
So we
That's
might
correct.
see a level of tumultuousness or a lot of change going on around 3rd house topics, which can be siblings, but also anything under the communication umbrella, which includes your own self-expression and saying things or writing things. But there's also a teaching and a writing component to the 3rd house, as well as like a paperwork, contracts, documents thread. And 6th house, of course, comes into work and also some of your health routines and things like that. I know that a big part of your work is involved in a teaching capacity.
Yeah.
And
In the army.
so, yeah, and this is 9th house for you as well, right? Transit Uranus is
Yeah.
in Jupiter in the 9th house. So it would make sense that there are changes to do with how you train or teach or develop other people or share your wisdom out in the world, whether that is you wanting to change the industries and organizations that you work for or the topics that you're involved with teaching and sharing, or whether the organization that you're a part of is going through some major structural changes that can show up as well with this type of transit.
Now, Jupiter return is happening in next year, February. I think that would be again a wonderful time.
Jupiter in Taurus, right?
Yeah, Jupiter
Yeah,
return.
so 2023. Yeah, 2023
February. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm just hoping things work out well and all. And I just want to share one incident actually. On 11th of May, when this Uranus was actually on that 11-degree marker, 11 degree 16 minutes, that's actually my MC degree. I had a little disturbance in my workplace. And that was so, I mean, it was actually some kind of a thing which I never expected. And that when I just checked the charts, it was actually happening on the sextile with my MC. So
Wow.
that 11 degrees 14 minutes on 11th of May.
Wow. That's so interesting.
I just wanted to share.
mean, and you've said something there that I want to repeat for everybody. We know that Uranus brings changes and things that we aren't expecting, or it surprises us. And the amount of times I work with a client or a student and we're like, yeah, it could be all of these weird things. And the thing that happens will be something that we didn't even expect, even when we were trying to think about unusual, unexpected, unconventional. And so sometimes when you're in a Uranus transit, the best sort of strategy is to be flexible and kind of be in a framework of being ready to be spontaneous, which I know seems like a contradiction, but sort of be ready to go with things even when they happen out of the blue or catch you by surprise. As soon as you feel like, oh my God, I was not expecting that, you know that Uranus has shown up.
Yes, Kelly, and that was a big realization. And
yeah,
today, even when I see the moon's transits, I don't think you'll be concentrating on that. I see that moon is in 12th house, moon is in Virgo actually. So it is again having a square with the Neptune, it has got a square with the Mercury. All these things, when I just combine, I even think these faster moving planets also, they are important. Because
they add in color. Yeah. But I mean, if you're baking a cake, the color of the icing is just a small piece. It could be pink icing, but still a chocolate cake on the inside. So the bigger transits, the slower transits will give us the main theme. But when we get into more advanced timing techniques, we do bring in the quicker moving planets, but for very specific reasons. So with what we're trying to do in this class, to get the main thread or the big topics and the themes, we'll definitely use those bigger ones. So thanks so much for sharing how this is going for you, Jay.
And I'm happy that you included the north and south node transits in this material.
Good. I'm glad. Yes, me too. Me too. We'll have more on those in other classes as well. So we'll keep going with them. Thanks so much, Jay.
Thank you.
Okay. So I think Kirsty is up next with a question. Let's see how we go here. If we can get you, sorry, hang on. Let's try and get you unmuted. Let's take two for that. Let's see how that's going. There you go.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, I felt more comfortable with posting the question.
Okay, shall I read it out then?
Yeah, I think it's okay.
Okay, perfect. So Kirsty's asking, during the transit of the nodes, does the node, let me just scroll back up. Does the node only affect the planet and the house where the conjunction happens and the houses that the natal planet rules, or should they also be considered hand in hand with the other node? For example, when the south node activates a natal planet, should I take into consideration the north node opposing it? In my personal experience, and in my very humble opinion, I don't think you need to bring in the other side. The main impact of that is going to be the qualities of the south node affecting the natal planet, and like 99% of what's going on for the person will come out of how you interpret that. So if it's the south node conjunct, let's say, natal Mars, we want to make sure we talk about the topics of the house that that's happening in, and how even just, Mars being depleted or Mars being turned towards more spiritual outcomes, what that might be like. And then definitely the topics ruled by Mars in the chart. So the Aries house and the Scorpio house, that's what I would do. That's how I would interpret that transit. I don't think you need to bring in the opposition. Sometimes there will be an extra bit that comes in, but the risk that you run is that you confuse yourself and you overwhelm your client just to add a tiny bit of decoration. You've already done the main thing by doing south node conjunct the natal planet and the topics that the natal planet is responsible for. So that's what I would really encourage you to work with. I know that once you get more competent and you're out in the world practicing, you're definitely going to change what you're learning here. But just to make sure that you can give a really beautiful, rich, and meaningful interpretation of what the South Node conjunctive planet means, that's where we'll stay for class for now. So does that give you some clarity about how to work with that, Kirsty?
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Fantastic. Hi, Oksana. I think you're up next. There you are.
Hi. Yeah. Hi, Kelly.
How are you?
I'm fine. Enjoying Belgian weather. As far as
It's beautiful right now, isn't it?
Exactly. I'm at the seaside, so it's much fresher than
lucky
in the
you.
country. So I will come to the point. I know that the time is precious now. So I have a couple of questions. We were speaking a lot about Mars transiting some houses.
Yes.
And my question is that in my case, transiting Mars is going through my 10th house.
Yep.
And I'm at this moment, I'm applying for a new higher position inside the company. So my question is it the right decision to do it now? Of course, the position just went open now, so I didn't have a chance to do it before or later. It will be taken, so the time is there. But is it positive or negative when your transit in Mars is going through your 10th house?
Yeah, a great question. If the positive or negative, often we have to go into the whole chart to get a really detailed answer to that. But I will say it's very common for people to feel restless and like they're ready for a change or a new challenge in their career when Mars is going through the 10th house. If you want to add, a benefic planet, which can be even more helpful, then you might wait until very end of the month when Venus is in Leo, and then Venus and Mars will be there together, and Venus can soften Mars a little bit. But it is very common for people to apply for things, and sometimes even if they don't work out, it's good to have had the experience or the action of doing something and taking action. So I'm a big believer in, if you feel ready to do it, let the astrology be like a reflection of what you feel, rather than, whether it's going to limit you, if you like.
So it will not be positive or negative, helpful or not. It's just there.
It's hard for me to say just knowing that Mars is in the 10th house, because it does depend a lot on the chart and, daytime, nighttime. It's probably a little bit more than what I can go into here. But yeah, so you look at other things that were happening in your chart in addition to Mars. To give something, I guess what I'm responding to is to say whether something will be positive or negative. You do have to look at, this piece is going to be really helpful and this piece could be problematic. And that's really a lot to get out of just the one Mars transit on its own.
Okay, I see the point. And
Yeah.
then coming back to transit in Pluto, because I've just received yesterday your email explaining, giving interpretation in the transit in Pluto to Sun. So my question is, will it be the same to ascendant? Because what now I am experiencing transit in Pluto on my ascendant.
Yes, yes.
And
So actually, I'm glad that you mentioned that. Yeah, there is an article on my website that I'm not sure if we posted the link, but if I haven't, I'm going to post it for you all. It's called 2021 Transits, and it gives date-specific information for transits to the sun in 2021. But the interpretive information would apply whether Pluto was conjunct your sun or square your moon or conjunct your ascendant or opposite your Venus, because the type of energy that Pluto activates it's just Pluto energy. So that will give you some understanding of Pluto. And then you just have to blend it with the topics of the ascendant in your case. And there is some crossover between the sun and the ascendant. The things that the ascendant has that the sun doesn't have would include the health and the physical body. But the ascendant and the sun are both about identity. So yeah, that information about power and transformation and out with the old and in with the new would definitely apply if Pluto was transiting to your ascendant, for sure.
okay, and seeing that my transit in Pluto will be aspecting my natal Pluto and my natal Sun next year, does it mean that I will have this 2-3 years period where
you'll have Pluto ascendant, and then the year after you'll have Pluto to the sun and Pluto to Pluto. So you will have, and it does depending on how our natal charts are put together, we will often have, I'm going to have 2 or 3 Neptune transits over a period of 5 years, or I'm going to have 2 or 3 Pluto transits over a period of a few years. I don't want to say it's common, but it is definitely something that you do see where you might have different types of Pluto transits. What I want to keep in mind, though, is that every Pluto transit will be a little different, and some are more intense, some are louder, and some are a little quieter. And so Pluto square the ascendant or conjunct the ascendant is going to be louder or more intense than Pluto sextile the sun, for instance, because of the nature of the aspect.
Yeah, because it's what I just wanted to confirm what you have written about Pluto transiting, but in my case, it's not Sun, but as I mentioned, the ascendant. I was really shocked yesterday by reading your article and applying to myself what's going on right now with me. It's like, even I said it to my husband, it's unbelievable how astrology reflects or say it in words, what I'm experiencing inside without telling to anybody, but you know it already, and it was really fascinating.
Oh, fantastic. So you were reading the email and it was telling you things that you had just been talking about when you were trying to describe it.
Exactly. So
excellent. Well done. So you have the astrology inside you now, which is fantastic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well done. Thank you.
Enjoy your day, and yeah, have a nice
Oksana. Enjoy the beach.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you next time.
You will, for sure, for sure. I think Angie is up next. Let's see if I can find Angie. If Angie is, there you are at the very top. Let's see if we can get you unmuted. There you go.
Hi, Kelly.
Hi, how are you?
Finding you, South Africa.
Well.
I was starting to worry if I was the only one in the Southern Hemisphere here.
No, there's a couple of Aussies on the call. I think we might have 3 Australians on the call least, and possibly a few more. Sophia looks like she's in Australia, and Jade as well. So yeah,
okay,
you might be the only one in South Australia, but you're not the only one in the Southern Hemisphere. And that's why we do the Q&A at this time for all of you people for whom it is evening right now. Yeah.
Right. So I have 2 questions. I'm very new to astrology. I only started beginning of this year. That's how new I am. Thank you for the course. It's been great. 2 questions. So which chart to use? For instance, so I am a Pluto transiting my sun at the moment, 16th of January. And if I use the equal house, then it puts me in the 4th house, which makes more sense because then I get 4th, 7th, 10th, and 1st, which is more accurate because I am in the process of moving to Europe. But If I use Placidus, it puts me in the 3rd house, which is also accurate because I'm also in the process of changing careers. I've just qualified as a doctor. So I'm not too sure which one to go with. That's the first question. The second question is timing rectification, chart rectification, I think is what they call it.
Yeah.
I have a 20-minute discrepancy on my chart, and that either puts me at a Libra ascendant or a Scorpio ascendant. How will that sort of impact the chart when I'm busy reading it? Those are the two questions.
Great questions. So the house system, I work with the whole sign house system. And I go into a fair amount of why I do in some of the earlier courses in the program. So the practical beginners, we're doing signs and houses. And there's also a blog post on the website called Why I Switched to Whole Sign Houses. So definitely check those out if you want to get into the material more about that. So I do use the whole sign house system, which is, it's probably closest to the equal house system, but it is still different from the equal house system. But I was originally trained with the Placidus system, but I stopped using that about 10 years ago now.
Okay.
So it's very common for people to come into astrology and be using Placidus charts, and that's just kind of like a common theme. And then once you get enough astrology under your belt, you can dive into questioning or exploring the house systems. But it's definitely a topic that is complex. And I often say to newer students, it's okay just to work with whatever house system you've got or your teacher has in the beginning. And if once you get a bit more familiar with the material in astrology, then you can kind of circle back to the house system. That's the approach that I would usually suggest. So whole sign house system for me. And rectification, it is a more specialized area. It's something that I chose not to focus on a lot early in my career. So I would recommend checking with an astrologer who might specialize in that to get what you need, because in the whole sign chart, the ascendant sign anchors everything. So if you're a Libra rising and the sun is in Capricorn in the 4th house, but if you're a Scorpio rising, then the sun is going to be in the sun will be in Capricorn in the 3rd. So the house, getting that birth time situation, that's probably more important at this point than even solving the house system conundrum. And working out, Libra versus Scorpio, two very, very different zodiac signs. So that's going to be your first port of call.
Okay. And if you were dealing with a client, would you interpret both if they weren't sure on their timing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So usually if I'm talking with a client, what I usually say to them is, if you've got like a choice between one or, two or so house rising signs, sometimes we can do a rough and ready educated guess in the session. Sometimes there's a discussion we might have about their physical health or their body that might lead us towards like the Libra rising based on where Venus is in the chart, or Scorpio rising based on where Mars is in the chart. So sometimes we can base that out. And other times I will just say, because we don't know, I can give you the Pluto conjunct Sun interpretation, but I can't add in that specificity with the houses, because we don't know, do you have Leo on the 10th house or the 11th house, for instance? So you can still do some useful timing work, because there are clients who will show up and just say, I don't know, I don't have any idea what time I'm born. I just know my date of birth is, 16th of January, 72, or whatever it happens to be. And then I think, okay, great. So we just take off that house layer of info, and then you have to fall back on your understanding of what is the sun about, or what is Venus about. And you can only do what you can do. In my experience, it's still very useful for clients to get the information, even if we don't have that specific birth time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great,
So
thank you.
You can still proceed, just with adjustments, basically. Yeah. And good luck with your move.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angie. So I think Jade is up next. Let's see if we can get you unmuted. There we go.
Hi, Kelly. Hi, everybody. Hi. Nice to see you all. I just had a question. I'm quite new to your style of astrology. I've been reading for a few decades, just since teenage years, that kind of interest. But this is my first official study this year as well. I'm really interested in the angle points and how important they are in comparison to the ruling planet of the angles, in particular the ascendant and the MC. I think in my question I was writing about the MC. I've got some big career stuff coming in the next couple of years with all those big planets moving into Pisces.
Yes.
I just wondered what your take on with that was.
With it, yes. And that's definitely there's a lot of nuance here, isn't there? It's like, well, this point is my midheaven, but this ruling planet that now Kelly is making me look at, what's more important?
Yeah.
So in the traditional or the sort of the ancient approach of astrology, the ruling planet of something has the final say or indicates the ultimate outcome in what goes on. And so this is why the ruling planet of the ascendant becomes so important, or the ruling planet of the midheaven becomes so important. And it looks like your midheaven's in Pisces. And so Jupiter is the ruling planet of your midheaven. And straight away, so if we lined up a room full of Pisces midheaven people, we could have some of them that would have Jupiter in Aries, and some that would have Jupiter in Virgo, and some that would have Jupiter in Aquarius, and some that might have Jupiter in Pisces as well. And each of them will be doing that Pisces midheaven in a slightly different way based on the placement of Jupiter in the chart. So it's part of how we get into the specificity or the individualization or the individual expression of a Pisces midheaven, for instance. And this applies, so every midheaven sign, there are 12 versions of it, depending on where the ruler is. And so from a transit perspective, the final outcome of what's going on for career is overseen or managed by the ruling planet. And if I had to sort of pick, I would look at the transits to the ruling planet of the midheaven as, giving you a huge thing. But when I say that, I don't want to dismiss how important a transit to the midheaven degree is. The difference between the angles, like the midheaven, the ascendant, the descendant, or the IC, is that there is a point out in space that is given significance because of the sun's relationship to Earth at the time you were born. But there's nothing physically there. So when a transit planet comes to sit on top of the angle or make an aspect to the angle, we get this very pure infusion of the transit planet's energy into our life. And because it comes in an unfettered, kind of unaffected way, it's just like it's all Neptune or it's all Jupiter or it's all Uranus if you've got your midheaven in Taurus, it is definitely going to show up and have a massive impact. So there are subtle ways we could say the transits to the midheaven ruling planet are slightly more important, but the idea of looking at the A-list transits in your chart, what we're saying here is that a transit to either the midheaven degree or the midheaven ruling planet is more important than other transits that you would be having. So it's almost like a photo finish in the Melbourne Cup race or something where they're both very close and there's, 4 or 5 horses behind, and those ones are there, but it's these two at the top that we want to make sure we focus on. And sometimes we'll have a period in our life where there are transits happening to the midheaven and to the midheaven ruler, but usually we have one or the other going on. And really what this is cluing you into is that both of those transits will have an impact around career and life direction. I've gone over a lot in response to your question, Jay. Does that help, or is there anything more you want to clarify around that?
No, that's great. That is really good. Thank you. I appreciate that.
My pleasure. It seems like we're going to see more from you in the future with your midheaven in Pisces flourishing.
Plenty.
Excellent. Fantastic. Well, thank you for joining us. I'm glad you could be here.
Thank you so much for opening an Aussie time for us.
Oh, my pleasure. It's important to me being an Aussie, and there's so many of you that we can't have our fun Q&As without all the wonderful Southern Hemisphere, and then also our night owls, which includes James. who is always joining us from late in his location. So that's great. Happy to be here. Excellent. Thanks, Jade.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think Julia is up next. There you are, Julia.
I found the idea of the teaching concept of VIP aspects and A-list aspect really helpful. And now I was wondering about stationary planets in the birth chart, because I read somewhere that sometimes if you have a stationary planet in the birth chart, it's sometimes considered to be the ruler of the chart even. And I personally have a stationary Mars in my chart, and so I was wondering if you would think that, or if you would consider a transit to this planet also in like an A-list transit, or at least more important maybe than all the others.
Right. So the
regular one.
Yeah. So I think a planet that is stationary in the birth chart, I personally wouldn't give that planet the status of ruling the chart. That would just be my my style. Probably wouldn't go in that direction.
I also don't feel like it is. So like the personal experience is also not fitting to that.
No, I don't think it does. But I think it definitely has an impact. I mean, when we go into chart interpretation, we learn a lot about the condition or the function of a planet in the chart. And one of the factors that feeds into that is whether a planet is in station or not, because that is a planet that is literally stationary or not moving. And so that creates a slowness or a congestion or a delay quality there. Julia, I might just mute you while I'm responding, because I think there might be a little bit of background noise there. There we go. Perfect. So the station is important. A transit to a stationing planet, so this is where it's like, I feel like we need about 6 more pieces of info, but I'll try and summarize them. If the planet is Venus in Taurus and it's stationing direct or stationing retrograde, that's the natal planet. And you expect really good things of this transit to the Venus in Taurus because you're like, it's Venus in Taurus. If Venus in Taurus is in station, it's going to be slower to respond and maybe less comes out of that transit than what we might expect. If it's Venus in Scorpio, it can add a quality that enhances some of the friction or the challenge that might be there already because of the sign placement. So if the planet in station is an inner planet, then we would include this on our VIP list of transits. And if the planet in station is the ascendant ruler or the midheaven ruler, then it would definitely come under that kind of A-list concept of transits. But it may not be. It may just be, that you have Mercury station and it doesn't rule anything. It would be, if it's transiting Uranus to Mercury station, I think you just want to factor in the idea that the planet's moving really slowly and therefore maybe less responsive or less activated by the transit. But it is the one thing I would say, it can be more problematic when the natal planet is in station. Does that help, or is there anything you want to clarify further? You're welcome to unmute if there's more.
No, that's perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. My pleasure. Glad to help. Okay, Leah, it looks like you have a question. Let's see.
Unmute.
There you go.
There I am. Yeah, I have a question about, so with a client, how much do you take into account their natal chart? Like, for example, say they have a really easy Saturn, say the Saturn is part of a trine and it's in Sag or something, then would the transiting Saturn be by definition an easier transit?
No.
Okay.
There's almost 2 pieces to your question, which is, it is important to look at the natal chart for sure, but primarily in the context of the condition or the function or the expressiveness or the lack of expressiveness of the natal planet that is going to receive the transit. But the quality of the a Saturn transit does what a Saturn transit does. It doesn't get easier because in our chart, Saturn is in a great condition, for instance. And the reason for that is that Saturn brings in by transit a quality of energy that we have no connection to. Now, if you're a person that has, we might say, a very strong Saturnian chart, maybe Saturn's on your ascendant or an aspect to the sun or the moon, or you have a lot of planets in Capricorn or Aquarius, you might have a component to your personality that is naturally perhaps more stoic or more reserved or great with boundaries, which means you kind of know what to do when Saturn transits your chart, but you still can have to do things that are difficult. But I know I do hear that a lot, like, well, I have this great Saturn in my chart, so therefore Saturn transits will be useful. It's just not something that seems to bear out in practice.
Yeah, okay. And my second question is this. I've been starting to read people's charts, and because of such an amount of info on the internet, I've been noticing a lot of people, this is hard to sort of explain, but a lot of people are sort of kind of arguing with me about what things mean. And so my question is around, at what point do you sort of become an astrologer that people listen to? Because I find that a lot of my friends anyway say, oh no, I don't use that house system or whatever it is that I'm sort of discussing with them. And then I think, well, how do I get past this sort of natural reluctance to listen to what I'm saying, given that I've been studying astrology for like whatever 5 years or so.
Yeah.
I'm sort of finding a lot of skepticism is the word. Yeah.
And is this primarily when you're talking about astrology online?
No, it's face to face with friends and things. Yeah.
And with friends who are interested in astrology themselves, or who may be less interested in astrology?
That's a good question. Maybe they're a bit skeptical to begin with. So yeah.
It's a great question, Leah, because when we start getting more involved in astrology, which can be after 5 minutes of studying or 5 years or 15 years, once you're in, you're usually in. But it's very natural to want to talk about it more and share it with people in your life. But not everybody is interested in astrology or spiritual things. Not everybody wants to talk about it to the level of like passion or intensity or detail that we might want to talk about it. And it might be that you're sort of learning that there are some people in your life that are kind of safe or okay for you to talk about astrology with. And there might be people that they're just not great for you to have these types of conversations with.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I was thinking it kind of might be related to Saturn being in my house of identity, because it's sort of about structuring what you were saying before about Saturn structuring your identity and being clear about who you are.
Yes, you've got an Aquarius ascendant, do you?
Yeah.
Yeah, and a big Saturn transit, whether it's in the 1st or in the 7th or sometimes even in the 11th, there is a sense of like pruning. I always think about Saturn transits as pruning the rose bushes. My dad used to do this in Sydney, and when I was growing up, coming into the winter or just after the winter, something to do with wintertime, and he would hack the rose bushes back. And I think, Dad, you're basically killing this plant. We're going to get nothing off it next year. And he would like, no, I've got to get rid of all the, the straggly branches so that the energy can be anchored in the root ball so the plant will survive the winter and then can flourish come the spring. And a Saturn transit is exactly like that. And sometimes what you're pruning away are people that aren't relevant or a good fit for the person that you're becoming. We all have people or even duties and obligations or routines and habits in our lives that we picked up somewhere along the way in the past based on somebody we used to be or a fear that we used to have. And when we have a big Saturn transit through our 1st house, it's a clue that we are redefining and resetting ourselves in the world, and that naturally creates some changes in the way we interact with people and also who we want to interact with.
Yeah, that's absolutely perfect. I think that's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing the astrology wrong, but it might mean that there are different areas you could have those conversations that will be more fruitful for you.
Thanks very much, Kelly.
My pleasure, Leah.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Thank
Okay,
you.
team. I know we usually do about an hour for this first Q&A, but there's one more question that I'm going to take before we finish today. So if you do, I know Nua had to leave, which is great. I can see some questions in there about progressions. I'm not going to take questions on progressions at this point because we haven't covered that in class yet. I know some of you will have done other training, or maybe you've taken my other classes on that, but I do like to try and keep our focus on the course material just to make sure we're going as deeply as we can with that. We will be doing a live course on secondary progressions starting in September. And so for any questions related to progressions, come along to that class. We will follow that progressions course in September with a class on how to combine transits and progressions. So particularly when you're looking at how the two might work together, that class will be starting in November. So we're just starting to put the tools in our toolbox, and we're going to get better and more complex and more layered with how we work with these as we go. James, I loved your commentary about the car driving with the stereo being too loud. And I think that was in regards to a planet transiting through a house, and then when it hits a planet or the ascendant by degree. So when a car's going by with the stereo, it's much more annoying when it's right by you and the bass is shaking your walls. That's a perfect description. There was another question here about what email was it that Oksana was talking about that had the info about the Pluto transit. So that's just the regular email list that goes out from my website. So if you didn't get that email, two things: you're either on the mailing list and the email got caught in your spam or junk folder, so that's something to check, or you're not on the email list and you can sign up by just popping over to my website. Usually there's a pop-up box that'll say join the newsletter or whatever. But if you don't see that, you can just scroll to the very bottom of the homepage and there'll be a section to pop that in. So that's what that's about. And then Leanne, let's take your question as our last but not least question for today. I can see your gorgeous face there. Let's see if we can get you unmuted.
Hi, Kelly.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you. I'm really glad that you had these sessions because I can't get to the lectures. So
no, you don't want to get up at 3 a.m?
No.
No. No, that's great. I'm glad
I have
here.
a little bit of a weird question, but I was just wondering if you've ever noticed, or if it's true, that hospitals can actually get times wrong enough, that they're not careful enough about recording birth times, so that that's my question.
Yeah, so it's a great question. And since it's usually a human being writing the birth time down in the delivery suite, I'm quite sure that there are mistakes that are made. And sometimes those mistakes are negligible in the sense that it's 5 minutes off and it doesn't change anything. And sometimes they're massive. It's 20 minutes off and it changes the whole thing. So I do think, I guess that's my short answer. The tricky thing is I'm not sure what we can do about that as astrologers, because we can only work with the data that we get.
I mean, the question comes up mainly because of my son, and as you know, he's adopted, so I wasn't there when he was born. So I do have his birth records from the hospital, which I've always sort of assumed were correct. But, you know, as he's getting a little bit older, and I've started to notice that, you know, some major transits that you're expecting to sort of like be rocking his world and our family's world just aren't. And I'm wondering, you know, is it, anyway, I don't know.
That's a great question. And I'm glad that you fleshed out why you were asking the question, because I think that when we're learning and developing our internal catalog of what a transit might look like or mean, tend to have some very clear, almost black and white expectations. So early in my practice, I was the same. And certainly as a student, I was like, well, this transit should mean this thing. and it meant it showed up in a different way. And then I'd be like, oh, it can be more subtle, or it can be, particularly with the outer planet transits. You read a lot online or even in some of the books about how massively life altering some of these transits are.
Yep.
And my experience, for instance, with Pluto transits, I have had Pluto transit almost everything in my chart just based on where Pluto was when I was younger and where the planets, I've got a lot of mutable planets in my chart. So the whole Pluto and Sag thing just, basically got 85% of my chart in some form or another. And there were some external things that went, like I could go, oh yeah, that transit was going on and this thing happened. But there was also a lot of internal processing that went on with that. And there was like when I had Pluto square Mercury, I was in a very deep internal space where I was doing lots of journaling. But it was also when I dived into studying counseling and therapy, which is a great way to use a Pluto square Mercury chart, because you are learning therapeutic techniques and theories, but you're also getting the chance to experience them and apply them. So you go into this sort of intensive tunnel. And so to your point, maybe the birth time's wrong, maybe it's not, but there's also a piece here where the possibility exists that the transits are coming up in slightly different ways from what you expect. And this is a way for you to kind of deepen your personal relationship with the different planets and the ways that they do and don't work on an individual, if you like.
Yeah, fair enough too. I mean, the other thing I have been considering is the fact that he does have 4 natal planets in his 12th house. And so maybe a lot of these things are actually happening internally and we're not seeing them.
Yeah. And how old is your son now?
He's 10 now. He's just about to turn 11.
Okay. So the other thing with planets in the 12th house is that sometimes this describes our internal space or our internal landscape. And even as an adult, having transits to planets in the 12th house, for instance, it can describe worries or maybe being a little bit anxious. And so it's not like a dramatic thing externally, but it could be an increase in anxious tendencies or behaviors that might indicate anxiety. Sometimes in the 12th house, it can show like disturbed sleep with dreams or waking in the night, or even having like fearful dreams, like nightmares and things like that. And the other thing with the 12th house is sometimes it shows that interest with spirituality of like wanting to do little meditations or say a mantra or look at the moon or what have you. I'm trying to think of things that could be accessible for a 10-year-old boy. And that it is tricky when you're looking at transits to a child, because their capacity for self-awareness and their ability to communicate or express what's going on is limited in some way. And I know that with your background, because Leanne and I know each other going back for a little while now, I know that you have like extra skills that most parents wouldn't have to help you get into that. But I think there's still some limits of how much we get out of a younger child, I think.
Yeah. No, that's good. Thank you.
So I think it would be safe to keep working with the time and maybe just have that openness of how might this show up, I think. Yeah. Excellent. Thanks, Leanne. That's a really good question, because I know that other people are going to be struggling with this, because it's often our first response is to think, oh, maybe I've done something wrong with the chart if it's not showing up, when you think it's not working, kind of thing. And just give it time. We'll by the end of the year, for those of you who are going to stay for the whole timing sequence, you will be amazed by how much you can do by the time we get the progressions in there and we look at working the transits and the progressions together. Fantastic, team. Well, thank you all so much for being here for the live Q&A today. It's great to see so many faces and to put names to faces and faces to names, and just to talk through the material with you. My hope with doing the live Q&As is just to help you go a little deeper into the material, for you to feel a little bit like there's that clarity, or you don't have that block that you used to have. Anything that's going to help keep you moving forward, because the learning and the magic is in the doing. So keeping you in motion with this is really the key. And to help you with that, we'll be back with class next week, where we'll be taking a look at the themes and common significations of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto by transit, but we will dive into topics and transits, which is more that's kind of the approach that clients will come to you with. So I'm going to help you be able to get to those. And Leanne's saying she really likes the readings and the homework that is marked and the feedback given. It's all great to have. Yeah, it's fantastic. I'm glad. And learning happens in that kind of interconnectedness. So we're hoping that these will help. And I'll see you all 2 weeks from today, hopefully for our next Q&A. I know some of you aren't able to make the live classes, but that's okay. We'll have our down under Southern Hemisphere crew plus all our extras joining together then. So have a wonderful rest of the day, team, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye for now.